El ranchero Heredó a las dos bellas esposas del jefe apache moribundo, y ocurrió algo inesperado. The rancher's life had always been quiet and predictable. He lived on the edge of the wide, open plains, where the grass swayed in the wind and the sun painted golden colors over the rolling hills every morning. His little ranch was modest, with a small wooden house, a stable for a few horses, and a patch of land where he grew vegetables. Life was simple, but it was his own. Every day followed the same rhythm, rising with the sun, tending to the animals, fixing fences, and working the soil. He had never expected anything unusual to happen in his peaceful life. One afternoon, as he was mending a broken fence post along the edge of his property, a rider appeared on the horizon. Dust swirled around the horse's hooves as it approached. The rancher squinted, recognizing the traditional clothing and markings of the local Apache people. The rider slowed as he neared the ranch, and the rancher could see the urgency in his eyes. There was a message, a request, something important that could not wait. The rider dismounted quickly, tying his horse to a post. "Sir," he said respectfully, his voice firm but hurried, "I bring news from Chief Tahoma. He is very ill. He asks for you. He wishes to speak to you before it is too late." The rancher wiped his hands on his trousers and stared in disbelief. Chief Tahoma was the respected leader of the nearby Apache community. He was strong, wise, and proud. Why would a powerful chief ask for him, a simple rancher, to come to his side? Curiosity mixed with caution as he agreed to go. The journey to the chief's camp was short but full of tension. The rancher rode silently, thinking of what could be awaiting him. Chief Tahoma was lying on a mat inside a large tent, surrounded by his close family and a few trusted advisors. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and herbs, a sign of traditional rituals meant to bring comfort and clarity to the sick. The rancher noticed the chief's face was pale, his usual commanding presence subdued by weakness. Yet his eyes, sharp and alert, still held the wisdom and authority that had earned him respect for decades. The chief motioned the rancher to come closer. His voice, though weakened, was clear and deliberate. "I have no much time left," he said. "My people, my family, they must be cared for after I am gone. You have lived your life with honesty and courage. I trust you. You will take care of my wives, my two beloved wives, as if they were your own family." The words struck the rancher like a sudden storm. He blinked, unsure of what to say. The chief's request was astonishing and unusual. No one outside the tribe had ever been asked to take on such a responsibility, and certainly not a simple rancher. The rancher felt a mix of emotions: honor, confusion, fear, and responsibility. He knew the importance of respecting the wishes of the chief, but he also realized the weight of what was being asked. Caring for one person was already a serious responsibility. Caring for two women from a culture so different from his own was something he had never imagined. He felt a deep sense of duty rise within him. He nodded, showing respect and accepting the trust placed upon him, even though uncertainty lingered in his mind. Chief Tahoma's wives were present in the tent, sitting quietly with composed expressions. Their eyes met the rancher's briefly, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and sadness. The rancher sensed that they, too, were unsure of this arrangement. Their life had been one of tradition and structure, and suddenly it was about to change completely. Yet the chief's decision was firm, and there was no room for argument. The rancher realized that respect, patience, and understanding would be the only way forward. Over the next few days, preparations were made for the transfer of care. The rancher spent time learning from the chief about the women's needs, their routines, and their preferences. Chief Tahoma explained not just practical matters, but also the values, beliefs, and customs that were important in their daily lives. The rancher listened carefully, understanding that this responsibility was not just about providing shelter and food, but also about preserving dignity and culture. Every detail mattered, from what foods they preferred to how they expressed respect and affection. When the day came for the women to leave the chief's camp, the rancher rode with them, guiding them across the plains toward his home. The women sat in silence for most of the journey, their expressions unreadable. The rancher tried to make gentle conversation, asking about their lives, their experiences, and their families, but he quickly learned that patience was more important than words. They would open up in their own time. Respect, he realized, would be more powerful than any attempt to rush a connection. Arriving at the ranch, the women were initially hesitant. The small wooden house and the modest land seemed worlds away from the environment they had known. Yet the rancher greeted them warmly, showing them the rooms, the stables, and the fields. He explained how he managed the ranch, the daily routines, and the chores, emphasizing that their comfort and autonomy would be respected. Slowly, they began to relax, realizing that although life here was different, they would not be forced into anything unfamiliar or uncomfortable. As the days turned into weeks, the rancher worked to make the women feel at home. He repaired fences, cleared paths, and prepared meals that blended the familiar flavors of the Apache tradition with the simple staples of the ranch. He learned their language in small phrases, enough to communicate respect and understanding. Every act was careful, deliberate, and thoughtful, as he understood that the foundation of trust could only be built through consistent and genuine effort. The women, in turn, observed the rancher's character. They noticed his honesty, his diligence, and his unspoken kindness in caring for the land and animals. Slowly, small gestures of trust and familiarity began to appear. One would help in the kitchen while the other attended to the garden. They shared stories of their past lives, tales of the tribe, and the lessons taught by their families. Through these exchanges, the rancher realized that his own life, once simple and predictable, was opening to new experiences, new perspectives, and unexpected connections. Evenings were particularly quiet and reflective. Around the small fireplace, the rancher would sit with the women, listening to stories of the past and sharing thoughts about the land and life. The nights were long and filled with the sounds of the plains, wind rustling through the grass, the distant cry of coyotes, and the soft murmur of a nearby stream. In this quiet, bonds were beginning to form, not through force or expectation, but through shared understanding, respect, and the willingness to coexist in harmony. The rancher often found himself thinking about Chief Tahoma and the trust he had placed in him. It was a responsibility far greater than he had ever imagined, but it was also a gift, an opportunity to show kindness, integrity, and compassion in a way he had never experienced before. He understood that the road ahead would be challenging, full of learning and adaptation, but he also felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he had known. As the first month ended, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The women began to take part in daily tasks, not out of obligation, but as a way to contribute and adapt. The rancher, in turn, learned to appreciate the wisdom and skills they brought with them. What began as an unusual and unexpected duty was gradually becoming a partnership, built on mutual respect, patience, and understanding. Though the journey had only just begun, the foundation for a remarkable story had already been laid. And so, the rancher, the two women, and the land they shared embarked on a journey together, one shaped by trust, guided by respect, and full of the promise of growth and unexpected lessons. It was a story that would change all their lives in ways none of them could have predicted, starting with the very first steps into a life none had imagined, yet all were now determined to embrace. Life on the ranch began to take shape as the rancher and the two women adjusted to one another. The first few weeks had been a mix of careful observation, tentative steps, and small gestures of trust. Each day brought new challenges and new opportunities for understanding, and slowly, the unfamiliar began to feel more like home. The women, who had spent their lives in the close-knit structure of their community, were learning how to live in a completely different way. They were cautious, yet curious, eager to explore the routines and rhythms of ranch life while holding on to their own traditions. The mornings were the busiest time of the day. The rancher would rise before the sun, the cold morning air brushing against his face as he fed the horses and checked on the small herd of cattle. The women would join him gradually, first observing and then participating in the chores. At first, it was awkward. They did not know how to handle the animals, and he did not want to push them too quickly, but patience became their bridge. He showed them how to fill the troughs, how to gently coax the horses to move, and how to care for the animals without fear. In return, the women offered insights into techniques he had never considered, ways to calm the animals, prepare natural remedies for minor ailments, and notice signs of sickness before they became serious. The work on the ranch became a shared rhythm, each person contributing in their own way. In the fields, the rancher taught them how to plant seeds in straight rows, how to water the crops efficiently, and how to protect the vegetables from pests. Meanwhile, the women taught him lessons too, how to use the herbs they carried, how to weave baskets, and how to cook simple meals using the land's natural bounty. Their knowledge of the earth, passed down through generations, was a treasure. He began to see that these lessons were not just practical, they were lessons in patience, observation, and respect for life. Despite the progress, tensions arose naturally. Cultural differences were apparent in everything from mealtime habits to daily schedules. The women were accustomed to rituals and routines that held spiritual meaning, while the rancher followed practical, often rigid schedules dictated by work and the sun. There were misunderstandings, minor conflicts, and moments of frustration. Sometimes he would misinterpret their silence as disapproval, and at other times they would feel he was too direct or impatient. Yet, each conflict became a chance to learn. They began to communicate more openly, asking questions, explaining their customs, and finding ways to compromise. Respect became the thread that held them together. The evenings brought another kind of connection. As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, they would gather near the small fireplace inside the ranch house. Here, the air was warmer and conversation flowed more freely. The rancher would tell stories of his childhood, of the small triumphs and failures of life on the plains. The women shared tales of their upbringing, of festivals, dances, and the wisdom of the elders. These moments were more than storytelling. They were exchanges of culture, trust, and understanding. Each story, each shared memory, strengthened the bond between them. Food also became a symbol of connection. At first, meals were simple and separate, each person eating what they preferred. But gradually, the rancher learned to incorporate the flavors and methods the women brought from their traditions. Cornbread was baked alongside traditional stews, herbs were added to soups, vegetables were seasoned with new combinations learned from the women. The kitchen became a place of experimentation, laughter, and shared effort. Through cooking, they discovered joy in collaboration and respect for each other's preferences. There were also lessons in resilience. The ranch was not immune to natural challenges. Storms swept across the plains, threatening the crops and testing the fences. The rancher and the women worked together to protect the land and animals, sometimes through long, exhausting days. These experiences built trust, as each person saw the dedication and strength of the others. The women admired the rancher's determination and practical skill, while he grew to respect their courage and resourcefulness. Together, they realized that surviving the hardships of the land required not just strength, but cooperation, patience, and understanding. As they grew closer, small gestures of care became a natural part of their life. The rancher would repair broken tools without being asked, prepare the firewood for the evening, or check on the animals late at night. The women, in turn, would leave small offerings of food, herbal remedies, or woven trinkets to show appreciation. These simple acts were not forced. They were born from growing mutual respect. Slowly, the rancher began to feel a protective affection, not romantic, but deeply human for the women under his care. Likewise, the women began to trust him, recognizing that his intentions were honest and his guidance sincere. Their bond was also strengthened by quiet conversations under the stars. The plains at night were vast and silent, filled with the distant call of nocturnal animals and the whispering wind. Here, they could speak freely, sharing fears, hopes, and dreams. The women revealed memories of their life with Chief Tahoma, their love and loyalty to him, and their uncertainty about the future. The rancher listened carefully, offering empathy and understanding. These moments of vulnerability brought them closer, creating a foundation of trust and emotional connection that could not be broken by distance, culture, or circumstance. Over time, the community began to notice the unusual household. Neighbors whispered, some in curiosity, others in mild disapproval. But the rancher did not let this affect him. He focused on the well-being of the women and the land, demonstrating that kindness, honesty, and respect could build harmony even in unconventional situations. Occasionally, members of the Apache community visited, bringing news, gifts, and stories. These visits were important. They reminded the women of their heritage and allowed the rancher to learn more about the traditions and values that shaped them. Challenges continued to appear, but the household learned to face them together. Illnesses in animals, harsh weather, and unexpected setbacks tested their patience and resilience. Yet each challenge also became an opportunity to grow, understand one another, and demonstrate reliability. The women began to see the ranch not just as a temporary home, but as a place where they could live safely and with dignity. The rancher, in turn, began to see that caring for them was not a burden, but a profound responsibility that enriched his life in ways he had never imagined. By the end of the first year, a routine had been established that balanced work, rest, and learning. The rancher and the women had formed a unique household, built on trust, respect, and understanding. They were no longer strangers, nor were they a conventional family. They were something new, an unexpected union forged through circumstance, sustained by patience and strengthened by mutual care. Through all this, the rancher learned a vital lesson. True connection does not depend on shared background or culture, but on empathy, honesty, and the willingness to walk alongside another person in their life. The women, in turn, discovered that trust could cross boundaries, and that a life far from tradition could still honor their values and bring them safety and purpose. Together, they created a balance, a rhythm, and a story that was uniquely theirs. And so life continued at the ranch. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new moments of joy. The rancher, the two women, and the land they shared were no longer merely surviving. They were living, learning, and growing together. It was a slow, deliberate process, full of patience and care, but it was real. It was life, unforced and genuine, and it was only the beginning of a story that would continue to unfold in unexpected and remarkable ways. As months passed, the bond between the rancher and the two women grew stronger, though not in the way many might have expected. It was not romantic love that tied them together, but something perhaps even more profound: trust, respect, and a shared sense of purpose. Each day on the ranch brought new lessons, small victories and sometimes failures, but they faced everything together. The rancher began to see the women not as strangers or mere dependents, but as partners in life, each contributing in unique and meaningful ways. The women, in turn, began to adapt more fully to life on the ranch. Their initial hesitations gave way to curiosity and engagement. One of them, who had always been more practical and resourceful, took charge of organizing the kitchen and managing supplies. She learned to make the simple ingredients of the ranch taste extraordinary, combining traditional herbs with the vegetables from the garden. Her talent for preparation and her gentle way with the animals soon became invaluable. The other woman, more observant and patient, found her place in caring for the land. She tended the fields, nurtured the plants, and taught the rancher small techniques for crop rotation, soil care, and natural remedies. Together, the household began to function efficiently, yet harmoniously, as each person respected the skills and space of the others. The rancher found himself learning more than he had ever imagined. Before the women arrived, he had believed his knowledge of the land and animals was enough to survive and thrive. But now, he realized that true understanding came from combining experience with new perspectives. The women taught him the names and uses of herbs, ways to notice subtle signs of illness in animals, and methods of sustaining the soil without exhausting it. They also taught him patience, showing that rushing or forcing results often caused more harm than good. Slowly, he began to appreciate that life was not merely about survival, but about living thoughtfully and with intention. Challenges still appeared, as they always would in life. Harsh weather tested the ranch and the people who lived there. A summer storm brought heavy rain that flooded part of the fields, threatening the crops they had worked so hard to grow. The rancher, together with the women, spent long hours repairing damaged fences, draining waterlogged patches, and salvaging what they could. It was exhausting work, but it strengthened their bond. Each person witnessed the other's determination, skill, and resilience. They realized that together, they could face challenges far greater than any one of them could handle alone. In quieter moments, the rancher began to notice small but meaningful changes in the women. They laughed more often, shared memories and stories more openly, and even began to play small, traditional games with him. It was not just about comfort. It was about building a life that felt safe and shared. The rancher, too, felt his own perspective shifting. He had once believed that life was simply about hard work and routine, but he now saw the value of connection, storytelling, and shared experiences. They were teaching each other, not as teacher and student, but as equals learning to navigate life together. The evenings were always special. After a day of work, they would gather near the fireplace, a place that had become the heart of the ranch house. They talked about their lives before the ranch, about family, friends, and traditions they had cherished. The women shared tales of Chief Tahoma, of ceremonies, dances, and teachings that had shaped them. The rancher listened with deep respect, asking questions to better understand their values and culture. In these moments, he realized that the women's presence had transformed his own life. The ranch, once a simple patch of land, had become a place of learning, reflection, and growth. The local community began to notice the unusual household. Neighbors whispered about the arrangement, some with curiosity, others with mild disapproval. A few approached the rancher directly, asking questions or offering unsolicited advice. The rancher remained patient, never raising his voice or showing frustration. He knew that the women's well-being was more important than the opinions of others. Slowly, some neighbors began to respect the way he cared for the women, recognizing his honesty, diligence, and integrity. Others remained skeptical, but the rancher and the women were focused on building their own life together, regardless of what outsiders thought. There were also moments of personal growth for each individual. The rancher found himself more open-minded, learning to appreciate traditions and practices that were unfamiliar but meaningful. He realized that his understanding of the world had been limited, and that embracing different perspectives made life richer and more fulfilling. The women, too, discovered new aspects of themselves. Living in a different environment challenged them to adapt, to take initiative, and to trust in someone outside their tribe. They learned that resilience could take many forms, not just endurance but creativity, courage, and cooperation. Small rituals became part of daily life, helping to bridge cultural gaps. The women would share stories and songs from their heritage during evenings, and the rancher would listen, sometimes trying to learn the words or melodies. They celebrated seasonal changes together, marking the planting and harvesting with small ceremonies that honored both the land and tradition. These rituals were not imposed but welcomed, creating a sense of continuity and connection between the women's past and their new life. The rancher began to see that honoring the women's traditions was not just respectful, it enriched all of their lives, giving depth and meaning to the ordinary routines of ranch life. Over time, laughter became more frequent, and joy appeared in small ways. A playful moment with the animals, a shared meal, or a simple compliment lifted the mood after long days of work. The rancher noticed that the women's presence had brought warmth and light into the home, transforming it from a mere shelter into a place of comfort and happiness. Their shared accomplishments, successful crops, healthy animals, and repaired fences were celebrated quietly but meaningfully. Each person felt pride not just in their own efforts but in the collective work of the household. The women also began to teach the rancher about the spiritual aspects of their culture. They spoke of respect for nature, for ancestors, and for life itself. At first, he listened with curiosity, unsure of how much he could truly understand. But gradually, he began to see the wisdom behind these practices. He noticed the way the women treated the animals with care, how they approached the land with thoughtfulness, and how they balanced work with moments of reflection. These lessons were subtle but powerful, influencing the rancher's approach to life, work, and relationships. By the end of the second year, the household had transformed. What began as a temporary and uncertain arrangement had become a functioning, respectful, and even joyful home. The women were no longer hesitant or reserved. They participated fully in daily life, offering guidance, care, and companionship. The rancher had grown into a leader not just of the land, but of this unusual family, learning to navigate challenges with patience and empathy. Together, they had created something unexpected, a life that was stronger and richer than any of them could have imagined when the journey began. Through it all, one truth became clear: respect and understanding could bridge even the deepest differences. The rancher and the women did not always see the world in the same way, but they had learned to listen, to adapt, and to support one another. Trust had become the foundation of their home, replacing fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They were no longer simply coexisting. They were living together in harmony, shaping a story of resilience, compassion, and growth. And so, the rancher and the two women continued their life on the plains. Each day brought new lessons, small joys, and occasional hardships. Yet they faced everything together, learning from one another, growing stronger, and building a bond that was unlikely to be broken. Their story was not about romance or grand gestures, but about human connection, respect, and the quiet power of trust. It was a story that would continue to unfold, each day adding a new layer to the life they were creating together. A life that had begun in uncertainty but was now filled with purpose, understanding, and hope. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, but the outside world was not as easy to manage. Word of the unusual household had begun to spread across the nearby community and even reached members of the Apache tribe. Curiosity, gossip, and concern created a mix of reactions. Some people admired the rancher's honesty and care, but others whispered disapproval, unable to understand how a single man could responsibly care for two women from another culture. These outside opinions created tension, both for the rancher and for the women, though the trio tried to focus on their daily life and the well-being of the ranch. One morning, a group of neighbors arrived unexpectedly. Their expressions were serious, their voices low but firm. "We've heard about your household," one of them said. "It's unusual. People are talking, and there are questions about whether this arrangement is proper. The rancher listened patiently, nodding. He knew he could not control what others thought, but he could show them the truth through his actions. "I understand your concerns," he replied calmly, "but I assure you, I care for these women with respect and honesty. Everything we do here is guided by trust and care, not by selfishness or disregard." The neighbors left with mixed feelings, some still skeptical, but others perhaps beginning to see the truth. The women were more sensitive to these outside opinions. Even though they trusted the rancher completely, they could not ignore the whispers and glances. At times, one of them would express worry about being judged or misunderstood. The rancher reassured them repeatedly, reminding them that their safety, dignity, and happiness were the most important things. He reminded them that they were free to make decisions about their own lives, and that he would never pressure them. Slowly, their confidence grew again, strengthened by the knowledge that he truly respected them. At the same time, members of the Apache tribe made occasional visits. They were careful, respectful, but curious. They wanted to ensure that the women's culture and traditions were being honored, and that the rancher's intentions were genuine. Initially, the visits were tense, but over time, trust began to grow. The tribe saw how the rancher listened, learned, and adapted to their teachings. He did not attempt to change the women or force them to abandon their heritage. Instead, he worked to create a space where their culture could coexist with life on the ranch. This balance was delicate but essential, and it became a source of pride for all three. Conflict arose when practical decisions needed to be made. For instance, the women preferred certain methods of planting, cooking, and animal care that were different from the rancher's ways. Neighbors and visitors sometimes criticized these methods, claiming they were inefficient or improper. But the rancher defended their choices, explaining that their knowledge was valuable and that he had learned much from them. He demonstrated the success of their methods through healthy crops, well-cared-for animals, and a smoothly functioning household. Slowly, even the skeptics began to respect the way they worked together. Tensions also came from within the household at times. Living closely together required compromise, and misunderstandings naturally happened. One day, a disagreement arose over how to handle a minor illness in one of the animals. The rancher suggested one approach, and the women proposed another, based on their traditional knowledge. Voices were raised, and frustration appeared. But after a few hours of discussion and reflection, they found a solution that combined both approaches. The animal recovered, and the experience taught them the importance of listening, trusting, and blending knowledge, rather than insisting on one way alone. The community's attention brought both challenges and opportunities. The rancher became something of an informal ambassador between his neighbors and the women. He explained their traditions, shared stories about their culture, and demonstrated the wisdom and skills they brought to daily life. He began to see that misunderstandings were often born of ignorance rather than malice. By patiently educating others, he helped create a gradual shift in perception. More neighbors came to observe the household, and over time, a few even offered assistance with chores or advice, showing respect for the rancher's dedication and the women's expertise. As time went on, small celebrations became a bridge between cultures. Seasonal events, harvests, and personal milestones were shared with visitors in ways that honored both the rancher's life on the plains and the women's heritage. They would prepare food together, explain the meaning behind traditional songs or dances, and invite neighbors to observe. These celebrations were more than rituals. They were opportunities to teach, connect, and demonstrate the harmony that was possible when respect and understanding guided relationships. The rancher began to see that integration, rather than separation, could create a stronger, richer community. Despite progress, the weight of responsibility remained heavy on the rancher's shoulders. Caring for two women, managing the ranch, and navigating the scrutiny of neighbors and visitors required constant attention and emotional resilience. He often stayed up late, thinking through decisions, planning for the future, and ensuring that everyone's needs were met. Yet these efforts were not burdensome in the way he had feared. Each act of care, each successful day, brought a sense of accomplishment and purpose. He realized that responsibility, when guided by compassion and respect, could be deeply rewarding. The women, too, continued to grow in confidence and independence. They learned more about ranch work, became skilled in animal care, and took initiative in managing daily chores. Their contributions were recognized not only by the rancher, but also by the neighbors and visiting members of the tribe. They began to feel a sense of ownership and pride in their shared home. Trust and cooperation had transformed them from hesitant outsiders into active participants in the life of the ranch. Through all the challenges and interactions with the wider community, a sense of balance emerged. The rancher maintained his role as protector and guide, ensuring the safety and dignity of the women. The women contributed wisdom, skill, and cultural richness, enhancing the household's life and work. Together, they demonstrated that differences could be respected rather than feared, that collaboration was stronger than judgment, and that a household built on honesty and empathy could flourish even under scrutiny. By the end of this period, the ranch had become a place of learning, resilience, and quiet leadership. The rancher and the two women had faced internal disagreements, external judgment, and practical hardships, but they had emerged stronger, more united, and more confident. Their lives were no longer defined by fear or uncertainty, but by choice, cooperation, and mutual respect. The bond that had begun as cautious trust had matured into a profound connection, one that was resilient enough to withstand outside pressures and flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. The wider community, observing this transformation, began to take notice. Skeptics softened, curiosity turned into admiration, and respect gradually replaced judgment. Visitors came less to question and more to learn, to witness how an unusual arrangement could function with integrity and care. The rancher and the women continued their work quietly, letting their actions speak louder than words. In doing so, they created an example of harmony, cooperation, and cultural respect that extended beyond the boundaries of the ranch itself. Through this journey, the rancher realized a profound truth. Life was not about controlling circumstances or meeting the expectations of others. It was about creating space for trust, understanding, and care, even in the most unusual situations. The women learned that safety, respect, and genuine partnership could exist outside familiar traditions. Together, they showed that the combination of patience, empathy, and shared responsibility could overcome fear, judgment, and doubt. And so, the rancher and the two women continued their daily lives, navigating the challenges of the land and the curiosity of the community with grace and resilience. Every task, every conversation, and every shared moment strengthened the household and deepened the bonds between them. What had begun as an unexpected responsibility had grown into a remarkable story of cooperation, respect, and unity. An extraordinary example of what could happen when people truly committed to understanding and supporting one another. Years had passed since the rancher first met. The two women. What began as a surprising and daunting responsibility had transformed into a life of quiet purpose, deep respect, and mutual care. The ranch had grown stronger, the fields more fertile, and the animals healthier. But more importantly, the bonds among the three had become unbreakable, built on years of shared work, understanding, and trust. Every day brought reminders of how far they had come and how much they had grown together. The women had fully adapted to life on the ranch, yet they had not lost their cultural identity. They carried with them the lessons, stories, and traditions of their people, teaching the rancher, the animals, and even visiting neighbors the values of respect, patience, and harmony with nature. In turn, the rancher had taught them the skills needed to thrive on the plains, from managing livestock to planting crops and surviving harsh seasons. Their lives had become a beautiful blend of two worlds, merging practicality with wisdom, tradition with innovation. One quiet morning, as the sun rose over the plains, the rancher stood outside, watching the fields glisten with dew. He reflected on the journey they had taken together. He remembered the first days, when fear and uncertainty had ruled, when the women had been cautious, and he had been unsure of how to navigate the responsibility placed upon him. Now, those worries felt distant. What remained was a sense of accomplishment, of shared growth, and of life lived with integrity. The women joined him in the field, carrying baskets of fresh herbs and vegetables. They moved with confidence, their laughter blending with the sound of the wind through the grass. It was a scene of harmony, a testament to what could happen when trust and patience guided relationships. They had learned to rely on each other, not because they had to, but because they genuinely respected and valued one another. Their household was no longer unusual. It was an example of strength, cooperation, and care that others could admire and learn from. The rancher often thought about Chief Tahoma, whose trust had set this story in motion. The chief had given him a great responsibility, one that could have been overwhelming or even impossible. Yet, through honesty, patience, and respect, the rancher had not only fulfilled that duty but had created something greater, a home filled with learning, laughter, and life. Every action, every decision had been guided by the desire to honor the chief's wishes and protect the dignity of the women. In that sense, Chief Tahoma's gift had extended far beyond what anyone could have imagined. As word of the household's success spread, the community began to see the three in a new light. Visitors came to witness the harmony they had created. Some were curious, others skeptical at first, but over time, admiration replaced doubt. They saw the care with which the rancher treated the women, the skill and knowledge the women brought to the ranch, and the seamless way they worked together to sustain the land. Slowly, outsiders began to realize that respect, empathy, and shared responsibility could create unity even in the most unexpected circumstances. Despite their integration, the women remained deeply connected to their cultural roots. They shared stories of their tribe, taught the rancher traditional songs and dances, and celebrated festivals in ways that honored their heritage. The rancher joined in, not as an outsider but as a student and a participant, learning to appreciate the wisdom and beauty embedded in their traditions. Through this blending of worlds, they found strength and joy. They realized that honoring one's roots did not require isolation. Rather, it could coexist with new experiences, creating a richer, more meaningful life. The household faced challenges, as all lives do, but they had grown capable of facing them together. One harsh winter, a blizzard swept across the plains, covering the fields with snow and threatening the animals. The rancher, together with the women, worked tirelessly to ensure the animals were fed and sheltered, the fences reinforced, and the fields protected. They endured long, cold nights and exhausting days, but the experience only strengthened their bond. Each realized that true resilience came not from individual strength alone, but from mutual support, collaboration, and unwavering trust. In quiet moments, the rancher reflected on the unexpected nature of life. He had never imagined that a simple rancher's life could transform so profoundly. What had begun as a daunting responsibility, caring for two women from another culture, had become a source of purpose, joy, and growth. He realized that life's most meaningful experiences often arrived unexpectedly, and that embracing them with honesty, patience, and empathy could lead to outcomes far greater than one could plan. The women, too, reflected on the journey. They had faced uncertainty, displacement, and cultural adjustments, yet they had found a home where their dignity, knowledge, and values were respected. They had learned that trust and respect could create safety and belonging in even the most unfamiliar circumstances. They had also discovered personal strengths they had never known: resilience, adaptability, and courage. In many ways, their life on the ranch had become richer than they could have imagined, filled with learning, laughter, and shared purpose. As the seasons changed, the household continued to thrive. Crops grew strong, animals were healthy, and the ranch itself became more productive than ever. But the true measure of success was not in material gains. It was in the strength of their relationships, the trust they had built, and the way they had navigated challenges together. Every task, from tending the animals to preparing meals, was infused with care and respect. Every conversation, every shared story, strengthened the bond that had begun in uncertainty and grown into something extraordinary. Neighbors and visitors began to see the household as a model of collaboration and harmony. People came not to judge or gossip, but to learn, to observe, and sometimes to offer help. They witnessed a life guided by integrity, patience, and mutual respect, a life where differences were honored rather than feared. The rancher and the women had created more than a home. They had created an example of what human connection could achieve when guided by empathy and understanding. Eventually, the story of the rancher and the two women became known not just for its unusual beginning, but for its remarkable outcome. What could have been a situation filled with conflict, misunderstanding, or hardship had become a story of growth, resilience, and harmony. The trio had proven that with patience, care, and respect, even the most unexpected circumstances could lead to lives rich in meaning, trust, and shared purpose. In their later years, the rancher and the women often sat together on the porch, watching the plains stretch endlessly into the horizon. They reflected on their journey, the hardships, the learning, the laughter, and the moments of quiet understanding. They had built a life that was unique, resilient, and fulfilling. They had proven that true connection does not depend on circumstance or background, but on empathy, respect, and the willingness to walk alongside one another through life's uncertainties. In the end, the rancher understood that Chief Tahoma's gift had not been merely about entrusting him with the care of the women. It had been about creating an opportunity for growth, understanding, and shared life that none of them could have imagined. The women, too, recognized that the rancher's honesty, patience, and integrity had allowed them to flourish in a new environment without losing their identity or dignity. Together, they had created a legacy that would be remembered, not for its novelty, but for the way trust, respect, and collaboration transformed their lives. Their story concluded not with grand declarations or dramatic events, but with quiet, lasting impact. The ranch continued to thrive, the women remained safe and respected, and the bonds between them endured. The life they had built together was extraordinary in its simplicity, profound in its humanity, and remarkable in its ability to turn an unexpected circumstance into a story of connection, growth, and enduring respect. And so, the rancher, the two women, and the land they had nurtured continued their journey, living a life that was rich, meaningful, and filled with the lessons of patience, understanding, and shared responsibility. They had proven that the most unexpected beginnings could lead to the most remarkable stories, and that with trust and care, lives could be transformed in ways no one could foresee.